You wanna bond your heart with mine? Will you marry me? My first love was soccer, and my last love was Laura. So I believe sharing the thing that I loved most with her is important.
Glad Beercon and I were able to reconcile, and I don't have to cut Michael out of my life. But I'm literally leaving when we just got things back on track.
Beeran tying that string around Laura's finger should have felt like the simplest kind of romance, the kind of quiet promise people want to believe in when everything around them is uncertain. But the problem is that this moment does not happen inside a clean love story. It happens on Laura's final day in Turkey, right before an airport goodbye, right after emotional damage involving Michael, and that is what makes the proposal feel so much heavier than a sweet final date surprise. Because Laura is not just being asked to say yes to Beeran in that moment, she is being asked to believe that. Everything they just went through can somehow become proof that their relationship is stronger instead of proof that the cracks were already showing. And that is where this scene becomes complicated. Because Beeran does not come in with a traditional ring, he comes in with a string. Something simple, symbolic, almost fragile, and in one way that makes the moment feel more personal. Because he is not trying to impress her with something expensive or perform a perfect fantasy, he is trying to create a bond between them with the only thing that really matters in that second. The idea that they are connected even when distance is about to pull them apart, but at the same time, that same string also says something uncomfortable. Because it looks beautiful when they are standing together, when they can see each other, touch each other, and feel the emotion of the moment. But what happens when that string becomes phone calls, waiting, jealousy, paperwork, fear, and silence from another country? Laura accepts, and on the surface, that is the big romantic payoff. The kind of moment people clap for, because love has apparently survived the storm, but if we are being honest, this is not the end of the storm. This is the quiet part before the next one. Because Laura is smiling, Beeran is, promising, and the goodbye is already sitting in the background like a countdown, and Michael is still part of the story whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Because the attempted kiss, the trust issue, and the emotional confusion did not disappear just because Beeran found a softer way to ask for forever. That is the tension the scene cannot escape, because Beeran may genuinely love Laura, and Laura may genuinely want to believe in him, but sincerity does not automatically erase timing, and timing is everything here. Because if this proposal had come after months of peace, clear boundaries, and proven stability, it would land one way. But coming right after conflict, right before separation, it raises a different question. Whether Beeran is proposing because the relationship is truly secure, or because both of them can feel how dangerous distance is about to become. And Laura's side is just as layered. Because saying yes may be a sign of love, but it may also be a sign of relief. Because after feeling the pressure around Michael and the fear of losing Beeran, this proposal gives her something steady to hold on to before she has to leave. And that is not fake, but it is not simple either. Because sometimes people accept a promise not only because they are ready for the future, but because the present feels too painful without one. So the real question is not whether the proposal was romantic, because it was, and it would be lazy to pretend Beeran did not put emotion into that moment. The real question is whether romance is enough when trust has just been tested, when Michael still hangs around the edges of the relationship, and when Laura is about to step onto a plane and turn their engagement into a long-distance test that cannot be solved by one symbolic gesture. Because the string may connect their fingers, but it cannot answer the bigger questions waiting after Turkey, it cannot prove whether Laura has really learned from what happened with Michael. It cannot prove whether Beeran will still feel safe once she is gone. And it cannot prove whether this relationship became stronger because of the drama, or only feels stronger because both of them are afraid of what happens if they let go. And that is why the proposal is not the most important moment here, even if it is the most emotional one. Because the real story is not just that Beeran asked and Laura said yes. The real story is what they were trying to repair underneath that yes, and whether a promise made at the end of a trip can survive the same pressure that almost cracked the relationship before the airport goodbye even begins. Beeran taking Laura to play soccer could have looked like a light, cute final day moment, the kind of scene that lets the audience breathe for a second before the airport goodbye, but this was not really about a ball, a field, or a playful date. because Beeran was taking Laura into a part of his own identity, something connected to his past as a professional player, and that matters because when someone chooses a place like that to explain love, they are not just trying to entertain the person in front of them, they are trying to show how they think, how they fight, how they commit, and how badly they want the relationship to move in one direction instead of scattering. The second life gets harder. And that is why the soccer lesson becomes more serious than it first appears. Because Beeran is not only teaching Laura how to kick toward a goal, he is turning the entire moment into a message about long distance, saying in his own way that they have to aim at the same future. And on the surface, that sounds beautiful. Almost too clean, because it gives the relationship a simple image the audience can understand. Two people, one goal, one direction. But real relationships are not won on metaphors alone, sadly. Because if they were, half the couples on this franchise would be emotionally functional by now, and civilization would finally get one small mercy. The tension comes from the fact that Beeran may be completely sincere, but sincerity does not answer the practical questions waiting outside that field, because Laura and Beeran may want the same goal, but they are not standing in the same position. They are dealing with distance, age gap, concerns, outside judgment, immigration pressure, and trust that has already taken a hit because of Michael, so when Beeran uses soccer to explain commitment, the scene feels hopeful for a moment, but then it starts to expose the exact problem he is trying to solve, because wanting the same future is not the same as knowing how to reach it. Laura seems open to the lesson, and that matters too, because after everything that happened with Michael, she may need this moment to mean something bigger. She may need to believe that the relationship did not just survive damage, but became stronger because of it, and that is a very human reaction. Because when people go through a messy conflict and still choose each other, they often want the pain to have a purpose. They want the argument, the apology, the tears, and the embarrassment to become part of a love story instead of a warning sign. But the dangerous part is that sometimes people confuse emotional relief with actual repair. Beeran's effort should not be dismissed, because he is clearly trying to build a memory Laura can carry with her when she leaves Turkey, and that kind of effort can matter in a long-distance relationship, especially when the goodbye is coming and both people know they will soon be forced to live on messages, calls, promises, and imagination, but effort also has to turn into a plan, because a soccer field can show intention, but it cannot solve loneliness, it cannot stop insecurity, it cannot make boundaries with Michael clearer, and it cannot guarantee that Laura and Beeran will still feel connected when the emotional high of this final day fades. That is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the scene. Because the same goal message sounds romantic, but it also asks the audience to notice what Beeran may not be saying directly. That long distance will not only test how much they love each other, it will test whether they trust each other when they are not watching, whether they can handle pressure without turning every fear into a fight, and whether Laura can protect the relationship from outside confusion without making Beeran feel like he has to compete for emotional space. So the soccer scene becomes a warning hidden inside a sweet moment, because Beeran may believe he and Laura are aiming toward the same goal, and maybe they are, but Michael still makes that picture less clean, because once he steps back into the story, the question changes from whether Laura and Beeran love each other to whether everyone around them is actually moving toward the same future, or whether one person is still standing close enough to turn a promise into another problem. Michael walking back into this story changes the energy immediately. Because the engagement is no longer just a private emotional moment between Laura and Beeran, it becomes something that has to exist in front of the one person who already made this relationship more complicated than either of them probably wanted to admit. And that is why his arrival before the airport trip feels so loaded. Because nobody has to shout for the tension to show up. Nobody has to accuse anyone. Nobody has to turn the room into chaos. Michael simply learns that Laura and Beeran are engaged, and suddenly, the proposal is not protected by romance anymore. It is standing in front of judgment, history, doubt, and one very uncomfortable question that everyone can feel, even if they do not say it too loudly. And this is where Michael becomes difficult to read, which is exactly why the scene works. Because if he came in openly angry or jealous, the audience could dismiss him easily, but that is not what makes this moment sharp, because he says, Beeran seems like a good person, and that one detail matters because it stops the story from becoming too simple. It means Michael is not just attacking Beeran for the sake of it, he is giving him some credit, while still raising the question that might actually be the most realistic question in the entire situation, whether love alone is enough when Laura and Beeran are facing long distance, age gap pressure, immigration uncertainty, and a relationship that just had to recover from the mess Michael himself was connected to. That is the uncomfortable part, because Michael may be too involved, and after the attempted kiss situation, viewers have every reason to ask why his opinion still carries so much weight in Laura's emotional space, but being too involved does not automatically make every concern wrong, and that is where the audience gets split, because one side will see Michael as a protective friend who is worried Laura is moving too fast, while the other side will see him as someone who should probably step back before he becomes the permanent third person in a relationship that is supposed to be. Between two people, a concept humanity continues to struggle with, apparently because boundaries are too advanced for basic adult operations. For Laura, Michael's reaction matters more than it should, because if he accepts the engagement, then the situation feels cleaner, almost like the earlier conflict can be folded into the past and everyone can pretend the love story has moved forward, but if he doubts it, then Laura has to sit. With the possibility that this proposal did not solve the deeper problem, it only made the stakes bigger, and that is why his partial support lands so strangely, because he is not fully rejecting Beeran, but he is not fully blessing the future either, and that middle position is more dangerous than open opposition, because it leaves Laura with just enough approval to feel understood and just enough doubt to feel shaken. Beeran may not need Michael's permission, but Michael's doubt still exposes the weak spot in the engagement. Because the proposal happened during a final day emotional high, Laura is about to leave Turkey, the relationship is about to become long distance, and the future depends on more than feelings. So when Michael asks whether love is enough, the question does not sound romantic, but it does sound practical, and that is what makes it hard to ignore. Because a beautiful proposal can prove intention, but it cannot prove endurance, it cannot prove consistency, and it cannot prove that. Laura and Beeran know how to handle the pressure once the airport goodbye turns into days, weeks, and months apart. So Michael becomes both a person and a test, because his presence forces Laura and Beeran's engagement out of the soft glow of the proposal and into the harsher light of real consequences. And whether viewers see him as honest or intrusive, protective or emotionally tangled, his doubt still lands in the exact place the relationship is most vulnerable. Because if love is not enough, then the airport goodbye coming next is not just a sad scene. It is the first real test of whether Laura and Beeran have something stronger than one beautiful final day and one promise made before distance. Had a chance to answer back. Laura packing up to leave Turkey is where the entire engagement starts to change shape, because only a day earlier, the string on her finger could still feel like a beautiful symbol, something soft and emotional and easy to believe in while Beeran was standing right beside her. But the airport turns that symbol into pressure, and suddenly this is not just about whether Laura loves Beeran or whether Beeran meant the proposal. It is about what happens when one person gets on a plane and the other person is left behind with nothing but trust, waiting, and a promise that now has to survive real life. That is what makes the goodbye so heavy, because Laura and Beeran are not breaking up in this moment. They are separating right after getting closer than ever, and that can be even more painful, because the relationship has just been given a future, but the future is immediately taken out of their hands and placed into distance, paperwork, timing, money, patience, and the kind of emotional discipline that romantic scenes never fully prepare people for, because a proposal can happen in one powerful moment, but long distance asks for proof again and again when nobody is filming, nobody is hugging, and nobody is there to soften the fear. And this is where Michael's doubts start to sound different, because earlier it was easy to question whether he was being protective, intrusive, jealous, or simply too close to a relationship that did not belong to him. But at the airport, his question about whether love is enough does not disappear. It actually gets louder, because now the age gap, the distance, and the pressure of building a real path forward are no longer abstract concerns. They are sitting right there inside the goodbye. And even if Michael's place in the story is complicated, the concern itself is not automatically wrong. Laura saying she plans to work on getting Beeran a visa gives the relationship hope, but it also changes the power balance, because now she is not only the woman who accepted the proposal, she becomes the person tied to the next major step, the one who has to turn emotion into action. And that is a lot to carry, because wanting someone to come to the United States is one thing, but actually moving a relationship across borders is a completely different kind of commitment, one that does not care how emotional the goodbye was or how sincere the promise sounded. Beeran's trust matters here too, because he has to believe Laura from far away, after a conflict involving Michael, after outside doubt, after an engagement that happened right before separation. And that kind of trust requires more than affection. It requires emotional stamina, because waiting can make people feel powerless, especially when the next step depends heavily on the person who left. And if Beeran starts feeling like his future is sitting in Laura's hands, that hope can slowly become pressure, resentment, or fear if the process does not move the way both of them imagined. That is why airport goodbyes can be emotionally dangerous, not because the feelings are fake, but because the feelings are intensified, and people say things in those moments that may be completely honest while still being harder to live out later, because separation makes love feel urgent. It makes promises feel necessary, and it can make two people believe that if they just hold on tightly enough, the practical problems will somehow become smaller. But distance has a rude little habit of doing the opposite. Because it does not shrink problems, it stretches them. So when Laura and Beeran say goodbye, the audience should feel both the sadness and the warning inside it. Because yes, Beeran was serious enough to propose, and yes, Laura was serious enough to accept and talk about a visa path, but the relationship is now moving into the part where romance has to become consistency, where Michael's presence has to become either properly bounded or permanently damaging, and where a string tied around two fingers has to turn into calls answered, trust protected, paperwork handled, and doubts faced before they grow into something bigger. They may survive this goodbye emotionally, but that is not the same as surviving what comes after it. Because once Laura leaves Turkey, the real test is no longer whether they can cry at the airport or make promises in a painful moment. The real test is whether their love can hold up when time, distance, uncertainty, and the people still standing around the edges of the relationship begin pulling on that same string from every direction. The hardest part about Laura and Beeran's story is that the love does not look fake, and that actually makes the situation more complicated, not less, because it would be easy to dismiss the whole engagement if Beeran looked careless or Laura looked completely unsure. But that is not what the final day gives us, because Beeran's string proposal does show effort. It shows vulnerability. It shows a man trying to create a bond before distance takes over. And Laura's yes does show hope, emotional investment, and a real desire to believe that everything they went through with Michael somehow brought them closer instead of leaving damage behind. But that is exactly where the final answer has to be honest, because the proposal was not simply romance, and it was not simply panic either. It was both hope and pressure sitting in the same moment. And that is why it felt so emotional. Because Beeran seemed to want commitment. Laura seemed to want a future. And yet the relationship was still carrying the weight of Michael's involvement. The age gap questions, the long distance reality, and the practical burden of trying to move a relationship across borders, which is a lot of pressure to place on one beautiful final day, no matter how sincere that day looked. So the real verdict is not that Laura and Beeran are doomed, because that would be too lazy, and the internet already has enough lazy opinions wandering around like they pay rent, but it is also not fair to say the engagement proved everything was fixed, because a string can represent connection, but it cannot replace consistency, and a proposal can reveal emotion, but it cannot prove follow-through, and an airport goodbye can make love feel urgent, but it cannot guarantee that the same love will feel steady when the calls get harder, the waiting gets longer, and the doubts start showing up without a camera crew to turn them into a dramatic scene. Michael's role is uncomfortable because he is not cleanly wrong or cleanly right, and that is what makes his doubts stick. Because after what happened with him and Laura, viewers can question whether he should have any emotional authority in this situation at all, but his concern about love not. Being enough still lands because the relationship really is facing problems that feelings alone cannot solve, and if Laura keeps Michael emotionally close without clear boundaries, Beeran may eventually feel like the same conflict is repeating under a different name, while if Beeran depends too heavily on Laura's promises from far away, the relationship can quietly shift from romance into pressure, where one person is waiting and the other person is carrying the next step. That is why the visa conversation matters so much, because if Laura follows through, the engagement becomes a real test of patience, sacrifice, and practical commitment. But if she treats the proposal as proof that the past conflict is already solved, then the relationship may carry resentment under the surface. And those hidden resentments are usually the ones that show up later pretending to be about something small. Because apparently emotions enjoy wearing disguises like this is a low-budget spy movie. The clearest truth is that love can be real and still not be enough by itself. Because real love still needs boundaries, timing, trust, action, and the ability to handle distance without turning every insecurity into a silent punishment or a public test. And Laura and Beeran may have a chance. If they protect the relationship after Turkey with the same intensity they showed during the goodbye, but the chance depends on what they do when the emotional high fades and the relationship becomes less about symbolic gestures and more about daily proof. So this story is not really about a ring, and it is not even just about the string, the proposal, or the airport goodbye. It is about whether Laura and Beeran can turn one emotional final day into months of consistent behavior when nobody is there to soften the hard parts. Because some proposals are not the end of uncertainty, they are the moment uncertainty becomes official, and Laura and Beeran did not leave Turkey with only an engagement. They left with a test, and the hardest truth is that everyone can believe in the relationship at the airport, but the real answer only starts showing up after the goodbye.